All right, so we will get started. So today we have Dennis Sherwood. Dennis is going to be talking about how to influence public policy decision-making from a systems perspective. And Dennis has his consulting company, which is the Silver Bullet Machine, where they manufacture silver bullet machines, basically great ideas, and helping clients to build their own machine to be able to generate great ideas. This is a practitioner networking session. So Dennis is a practitioner that works with clients, and this is an opportunity for us to get together with other practitioners in the field, learn about this topic that Dennis has been exploring and discuss it. And then also we can network at the end. Okay. So if you aren't already a member and would like to become a member, we have a lot of member benefits, and they're now a 12-month membership subscription. So feel free to join us. And we also have an upcoming conference in Bergen. This is going to be from the 4th to the 8th in Norway and also online. It's a hybrid conference this year. And the topic is building bridges for new insights. So the agenda today is introductions, the practitioner presentation, discussion and networking, and closing thoughts. My name is Megan Colvin, and I am the Director of Outreach at the System Dynamics Society. So I'd like to welcome you all today. Thank you for joining us. If you could share with us in the chat your name, organization, and role, and one of your favorite things about working with clients or doing system dynamics modeling. We can pull up the chat. We still have people coming in. So feel free to just add in the chat your name, organization and role, and one of your favorite things about working with clients or doing SD modeling. This will help us get a sense of who's in the virtual room today so that Dennis has a better idea also of who his audience is. Okay, so we have Carrie Turner, Anupam Saraf. Anupam's been at almost all the networking events lately. Thank you so much for joining us again. Thomas Gilo Ortega, Atika from Bangladesh, working under the Ministry of Agriculture in Bangladesh. Okay. Charlotte in the Netherlands, Karim from IC Systems, Solveig from Iceland, Svetlana from Idaho National Laboratory. Great. We can continue monitoring the chat as we go along and get a better sense of who all is here. April, a researcher at the Odyssey University of Applied Sciences, Jonathan from Switzerland. Great. Thank you all for joining us. We are going to now move to Dennis's presentation. So in April, the UK government announced that undocumented asylum seekers arriving in the UK will be deported to Rwanda. And Dennis is going to be exploring how this was intended to be a disincentive to reduce the number of dangerous crossings of the English Channel in small boats. But he's wondering, is this a case of perverse incentives? What other kind of unintended consequences could come out of this? And how systems thinking can be used in influencing high-level policies. Dennis has a background as a scientist. He studied physics at Clare College in Cambridge, then got his MPhil in molecular biophysics and biochemistry at Yale, and a PhD in biology at UC San Diego. In 2001, he founded his management and consulting firm, The Silver Bullet, and he's also the author of several books related to creativity and great ideas and science. So I will let Dennis, take over now with your slides and you can start your presentation.
Super. Thanks very much, Megan. Let me just bring my screen up. Is everyone looking at the picture of a boat approaching the White Cliffs of Dover? Yeah? Is that visible to everyone? Is that working? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, great. Now, this presentation is a plea to policymakers to think wisely. And thinking wisely is, to my mind, greatly assisted by systems thinking, especially by causal loop diagrams, and then indeed quantifying them with simulation models. My experience in the UK is that it hardly happens at all. And I think our policy making is diminished by that. So anyone who's involved with policy or has influence on policy, they need to know about systems thinking. Now, all of us, we're here because we already know about it. So we know all of this stuff. So the big question is, how do we get all the people that don't know about it coming into these sessions so they actually learn about it and can do it? And there's a great case study, I think, on the table right now. These small boats cross the English Channel. That boat is full of asylum seekers. They've left dangerous places in the Middle East, in Africa, wherever. And they're seeking asylum in Britain. But the only way they can get there is on those small boats. Now, that picture is taken on a nice day. The English Channel is often not nice. And there are many, many people who drown because those boats sink. It is a human tragedy at scale. So far this year, that's to the beginning of June this year, around 12,000 asylum seekers have actually made it across the Channel and hundreds have drowned. It's a tragedy on a human scale, and it's a tragedy politically as well. Now, in 2022, as this shows, the British Home Office, which is responsible for immigration, published a policy, a new migration and economic development partnership. And that's what it says. To support those fleeing persecution. Importantly, to disrupt the business model of organizational crime gangs and to enhance economic policy. These were the stated objectives of this policy, which was announced way back in April 2022. It hasn't been implemented yet. It's a major political issue with the British election today. Indeed, it was the #1 item on the British news, literally today. And as you'll see from there, the key target is to disrupt the business model of the organised crime gangs, because those boats are organised by criminals. The asylum seekers pay vast sums of money. It's around £2,000 or even £3,000 for a seat on one of those boats in order to get to England. Big criminal operation. And the key target, interestingly, is not to stop migration happening in the first place, not even to stop asylum seekers coming to Britain, but to hit the organised crime gangs. I find that kind of odd, if not interesting. So I was thinking about a causal loop diagram that will depict this kind of situation. And let me note that the causal loop diagram I'll be describing to you is mine. I haven't done focus groups and workshops with asylum seekers. I don't know what they're thinking about. I can only guess. I haven't worked with policymakers either. This is just my thinking, because actually, I believe you can think about these things quite coherently. You may have very, very different ideas. You certainly won't agree that the diagram I've got is right. No diagram ever is. It's just the portrayal of my mental model. But if it can stimulate debate and discussion and maybe lead to a wiser place, I think that's a good thing to do. And that's why I really like causal loop diagrams. They stimulate discussion, they stimulate thought. You can see from this picture of our current Prime Minister, there's a week to the election, Rishi Sunak. He's standing there and his platform is Stop the Boats. It's all about breaking that business model. Now, as you all know, A business model is all about demand. If there ain't no demand, there's no business. So a demand for small boats actually drives the number of boats that are coming across. And in these diagrams, the way I draw them, that's link there is a positive link. There's no little s, there's no plus sign on there. The fact that it's a positive link is embedded in the arrow itself because I use solid arrows for S links, positive links, and I use dashed arrows for O links or negative links. It's binary, so by incorporating the symbology in the arrow itself, it actually makes the diagrams a bit less cluttered. Okay. As the boats come across, they offload the people, and that obviously increases the number of people who are coming into the UK as immigrants. And that gives rise to big political pressure because immigration in the UK, as it is in many other countries around the world, is a political hot potato. And the bigger the political pressure, the lower the target number of small boats that the government or the policy makers believe should be there. And there you'll see I've used a dash link. That's an O link, a minus link, a negative link, an inverse link, because the greater the political pressure, the smaller the target. Given the difference between the actual and the target, you get a boat's gap, as with all balancing loops to come. And the boat's gap, in this case, is defined as the actual number, which is big, target number small, so actual minus target will be algebraically positive, which is why the two links, this positive link, this inverse link, are that way around. What happens next? Well, a consequence of the boats gap is a political imperative to reduce the number of boats, driven by the size of the gap and indeed the political pressure. That's what they want to do. They want to break the business model, and you break the business model by threatening to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. That's the heart of the policy. And what that does is that decreases the demand for small boats. And because it decreases the demand for small boats, that disrupts the business model of the people traffickers because they've got no one to carry across. And the reason they've got no one to carry across, making no money, is because the policy believes that the threat of deportation to Rwanda will be a disincentive which will deter prospective asylum seekers for coming to Britain. And this is a balancing loop. You can see that there's the one inverse link at the bottom right. That balancing loop achieves the goal of bringing the actual number of small boats into the target number, thereby destroying the business model. That's the government's belief. This is what they have been articulating for at least 2, if not 3 years. And the question is, does that make sense? Well, let's have a look from the perspective of the asylum seeker. So I'm now going to do what I believe the asylum seeker's perspective to be. And once again, basically I have made this up, but I hope it's, reasonably intelligent. My starting point is that everyone wants to be safe. Everyone watching this hopefully is safe, but there are many, many people around the world who are not safe because their actual safety is driven by their local conditions of war, famine, persecution, climate change, flooding, all the bad things that we know and can think of. And the stronger that any one of those are, let alone those in combination, the lower the actual safety. And of course, that drives a safety gap to an individual. Now, many, many individuals around the world are obliged to put up with it. And they live where they live. They feel they cannot move. But I believe that as that safety gap gets more pressing on an individual and a family, that actually drives that individual or that group of people to seek to flee their existing environment to somewhere safer. So the greater the instance of those very, very bad things, the lower the safety of individuals and families and groups. They want to get out of there. So where do they go? They've got to leave. They've got to go somewhere. And what that suggests is that there is a choice. Is the choice of that asylum seeker, insofar as they exercise choice, to flee anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter, or do they have a preference for coming to the UK for whatever reason? The UK is a rich place. It's a good place to come. The UK is a place where people will often have families, especially if there's been some association in the past with what used to be the British Empire, Afghanistan, Central Africa, the Caribbean. But there is a choice of, do we flee to the UK on the right or elsewhere at the top? And as you see here, that's a balancing loop. That's the inverse link. So fleeing to somewhere other than the UK will raise the level of safety of that individual, which closes the balancing loop, which is satisfying to the individual fleeing. And I've suggested here there's some kind of factor, that relative preference to come to the UK or to go elsewhere. If that preference is strong, that will tend to drive things towards the right. If that preference is relatively weak, that will drive things towards the left. Now, I don't know how asylum seekers take that decision of where do they go, but somewhere in their minds, they must be saying, do I flee southwards towards Southern Africa? Or do I flee towards Northern Europe, Scandinavia? Or do I come to the UK? Or do I stay in Italy, where I might first land if I've come across that even more dangerous sea crossing of the Mediterranean? So anyway, let's go on and say, what happens when the asylum seeker is seeking to come to the UK? Well, once again, there's a degree of choice in principle. They can take a legal route with all the right documentation, passports, visas. And if they go there, that's the balancing loop that is satisfied, that central one. That brings their safety up. They're safe in the UK, and the balancing loop has worked. However, they might actually say, for whatever reasons, I'm going to try to get in, but I don't have the papers. I don't have a visa. I have to go illegally. And of course, that preference, insofar as it is exercised, is heavily influenced by the ease of access to the legal route. If the legal route with all that documentation is in essence closed because they can't get a visa, because there's no consulate that they can go to in their original place of living where they could get maybe the papers, if they don't have the money, they're forced to go illegally, which takes them around that right-hand bend there. Okay, what happens next? Well, once again, there's a choice. They've already decided they want to come illegally. They're sitting there in a camp on the northern shore of France, perhaps near Calais. And they've got a choice of which illegal route they might wish to go to. And indeed, for many, many years, the illegal route of preference was to get into some kind of container on a lorry and come across the lorry, come across the channel on a lorry, or maybe sit somewhere on the Eurostar train if they can sneak in there like American hobos from the 20s. Or they can go through small boats. And once again, there's a relative preference. Which way do they choose? A difficult preference, but that choice is there. Now, if in fact they choose to go through the small boats, there's the demand for small boats driving the number, which leads them in principle to safety when they land under those white cliffs. And as you can see, I have highlighted in thicker arrows around there a balancing loop. If you follow that loop all the way around, there's one inverse link, it's there. Therefore, it's a balancing loop, and it brings the actual level of safety up to the desired level of safety by bringing people across the channel in the small boats. Now, to my mind, that's a stab at what the asylum seekers are going through. That is the world as they can see it. And one consequence of that world is that all of those routes increase immigration. Now, that world is very different from that world, which is the politician's policy. The only place where there's a little bit of coincidence is down here, because this is driving that demand for small boats and driving the actual number up. But these diagrams are in different spaces, so we need to bring them together. And that's what happens when you superpose the one on the other. And there's a structure there, fundamentally, of two balancing loops, one embedded in the other. The yellow one, which is the balancing loop of the policy the government wish to implement with their objectives and their target, and the purple one, the pink one, the magenta one, being the balancing loop of the asylum seeker who just wants safety. And they're not really connected except down here. So the question is, what are the connections and where are they? And let me just leave that diagram on the screen a bit, because you might like to think about how they are connected and what might be connecting them. I've got some to suggest, but actually, Megan, maybe there's some people in the group that might like to chip in with their thoughts right now. Does this make sense so far? Does that capture the yellow loop, the government? Is the magenta loop kind of sensible for the asylum seekers? And if so, how might they be connected? And we'll see where we go. Anyone wanting to come in, Megan, please bring them in.
Would anyone like to share their thoughts?
I think I can see Colin Beveridge has got a hand. Hi there, Colin. Colin, you're on mute.
Colin?
On mute, Colin. Colin, you're on mute.
Not now.
Okay.
Sorry about that. You. Yeah. Sorry for late arrival, but I can just see something on the yellow loop, Dennis. That's the capacity for deportation to Rwanda.
Yeah.
So if that capacity is reduced or exceeded, then that's an influence, I suspect.
Absolutely right. Good one. There's lots of things that I'm sure could well go on this diagram. Yeah, you're right. If the capacity is small, there's a constraint on that. If the capacity is very big, that is bigger risk to the asylum seeker. Thanks, Colin. Anyone else wish to chip in? I can't see all the hands.
So, hi, Dennis.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few things, more things driving that demand for small boats, because it's not just the number of seekers. If there's nothing in it for the people providing the boats, they're not going to supply them, so I don't know what they get in return, whether there's some huge amount of money, but that amount of money, and then their attitude to risk. There's something there about the actual people getting on the boat. Do they believe that threat? Is it a believable threat?
Yeah, there's certainly the supply side is not on there at all. I think I read somewhere that it's about £3,000 a seat on the boat. So there's a lot of money in it for those organised crime gangs. But yeah, somewhere in that bottom left, there's a supply side as well. Risk and threat, yeah, that's all true. Other thoughts before I chip in?
I think as well, the risk of one of these boats going down and you losing life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's something in the demand for small boats is, the risk of drowning must be a huge thing in people's minds. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone that's interested, very happy to send these slides around.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. How to quantify the effect of the threat of deportation? That seems critical.
Yep.
And then, are there any groups in the UK that want to support these asylum seekers getting to the UK safely?
All great points.
And then someone else, John says, boats are fungible. If boats are somehow limited, then immigrants will find another method.
Aha. Asylum seekers other illegal routes or other ways of doing it. I see there's a hand from Solveig.
Yes, hi. Very interesting. I had a point or a question when you got to the issue about war, famine, persecution, climate change, and they are, these are really, really desperate people that are getting on these boats. And I was just wondering about the threat of deportation to Rwanda. And is it always a threat? I mean, if you look at some of the horrible circumstances that people live, going to Rwanda might not be such a bad option. So that could actually increase the demand for small boats. Because more people say, well, if we get to England, we can go to Rwanda.
Well, actually, compared to where these people are coming from, Rwanda is probably quite pleasant.
Exactly. They're not coming from some nice place, and Rwanda is a horrible choice. But I can see the contradiction in what I'm saying, that we don't want just to send people to Rwanda. But when people are being bombed to hell, I mean, I'm sure lots of people in Gaza would rather be in Rwanda than Gaza. Who cares about England? So I that's just another issue of why this could backfire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solveig, and everyone else as well. You've all got great points, and as I say, this is just a vehicle for discussion, and we can enrich it if there's any interest. But can I chip in with the ones I thought of before? Because let me start here. The first one is a link from the threat of deportation to the preference for small boats. If you come over on a boat, you will get deported. The stronger the threat, the more the preference might be to push people to other ways of doing things, which is up there. And that's an inverse link coming round there, which completes a balancing loop. And that, I'm sure, is a representation of the government's intent. That is their policy. The threat will decrease the preference for small boats. That will destroy the business model. But of course, the consequence of that is it just means that the asylum seeker may say, I will seek another way of getting in illegally, or much more likely, the traffickers will find other ways of getting people into England, which actually goes around the small boats route, or they take boats to other places, not the south coast. So it's an incentive on the smugglers, the criminals, to be cleverer in the way in which they satisfied that demand. That's one. I think there are some others. There's another one there, coming in from there to there. The threat of deportation might actually influence the preference between the legal and the illegal routes. I think that's in principle possible. My own personal opinion of that, I think that's extremely weak, because by the time people have got here, they don't have the opportunity for legal access because this is so difficult. But in principle, that might work. There's another one, I think, which is that one there, which I think is probably very strong in the government's mind, that the threat of deportation to Rwanda just makes Britain as a whole less preferential, so forcing people that way, so people close that loop. And they talk about that. Why don't the asylum seekers stay in France? They're already in France. They've come to France before they get to England, therefore they can stay in France. So I think the threat of deportation to Rwanda is a mask for a political game that the UK is playing, saying, we don't care about illegal immigrants as long as they're not illegal here and they can stay somewhere else. So those are three possibilities, and they all run in parallel with one another, and they are all balancing loops that meet ostensibly the government's objective, subject to two other things. That we've already mentioned. The threat of deportation is only a threat if I worry about it. But, the more in despair I am, the more hope I have that the people won't be caught. I'll go on a boat. I won't be caught when I arrive the other end. I'll be safe. And I'm a lot safer in Britain, even after crossing the channel in a small boat. So the bigger that desperation, hope, many other descriptors we can have of that, the lower the threat. So the whole thing is blown up, solving exactly as you were saying. And let me throw in two other things as well. There's this one here, which is politics. The government can close their own loop at the top, perhaps just by talking about it and by kicking up a fuss and by saying we're all going to do this simply as a way of reducing the political pressure. Now, I don't know whether that's the case or not. I don't know what the motives of the government are, but I can imagine looking at this diagram that some people will feel that the political pressure can be reduced, nothing to do with immigration at all, simply by kicking up the kind of political fuss that we hear every day on the television, and that the fact that the current government of Boris Johnson and all these people are talking about it means that the political pressure on them is reduced because they can be seen to being hard men. And there's one other thing too, which this diagram triggers, and that's that. That says, okay, there's a political imperative to do something about small boats in particular, or immigration. What other things can we think of that might actually disrupt the business model and reduce small boats, which are not about Rwanda? And I think that's a good conversation to have. And I can think of one right away. And actually, it's driven by the objective of tackling the business model of the smugglers. Now, people traffickers get money. In a sense, they are businesses, and everyone around this group will know that businesses have business models. And everyone will know that if a competitor wishes to attack someone else's business model, they do one or both of two things. They come up with a better product at a cheaper price. Because if you come up with a better product at a cheaper price, then the business model of that other competitor is blown up. So here is a business model at a cheaper price. You actually come in over here and make access much, much easier to Britain and process the asylum seekers. For example, and I just wave this as a hypothesis, if there was an office in Calais where asylum seekers could come to and get a ticket on a cross-channel ferry at £30 rather than £3,000 for the small boat, and if they were organised in a sensible way and treated when they got off the other end, the people smugglers cannot compete with that. And you've destroyed the people smugglers, and you might have a way of organising asylum seeking, different from illegal immigration, asylum seeking in an organised way. Because that builds in a balancing loop. If you follow that figure-8 route all the way round, that actually, there's the inverse link. The balancing loop does a nice figure-8 across the diagram, meets the objective of having no small boats, and at the same time, it meets the objective of the asylum seekers of being safe. Now, okay, there are all sorts of implications of that policy as well, but the systems thinking causal loop diagram triggers all of these suggestions, which takes me back to my original point of how systems thinking should, in my view, influence public policy, because diagrams such as this should be on the table for everything. And it certainly should be on the table in government, in the policy-making departments, so they can discuss and come up with such wisdom and then actually argue. Because in the experience we're having right now in the UK, you get such biased discussions around the election where people are looking at a complex situation, they're identifying some features which meet their story and they're deliberately ignoring others. So the other side then deliberately pick up the others and ignore the first ones. Complexity is by definition complex. We need to look at things in the whole. Systems thinking can help. This diagram, as I say, I invented it. It's not the result of all sorts of workshops and collective model building, but it stimulates a conversation and it might have some merit. That's it. Please contact me if anyone would like one. But just before I finish, one other thing, if I may, there's a deep structure on this diagram, which I think is really, really important in many, many situations. And given that this is a practitioner event, if I may have just another couple of minutes, Megan, I'd like to abstract from that specific diagram something much more generic, because fundamental to that diagram is a structure of two intertwined balancing loops representing the objectives of different communities. Now, in my experience, balancing loops, budget, actual, target, action, whatever it might be, performance measure, actual, performance measure, target, gap, action, are all there to drive behaviours into a particular direction. And I'd like to distinguish two cases of balancing loop. There's the balancing loop for me. I'm too tubby. I need to lose weight. Target, less weight. Actual, what I am now. Weight gap, action, diet a bit, take more exercise. Now, we all know that balancing loop and we all know that works. But a fundamental characteristic of that balancing loop is that I am in charge of all of the variables in it. I can set the target. I've got my own actual. I define the gap. I can take the action. It's mine. And I contrast that with the balancing loop of me as a parent going to a teenage kid and say, please tidy that room. I have the target of a tidy room. The actual room is a mess and there is a gap. But unless I tidy it myself, it ain't going to happen, because the action that is required to meet my target needs to be taken by a third party, that teenager. And if the teenager isn't motivated or doesn't want to do it, it doesn't matter what my target is, it ain't going to happen. Now, the situation where the person that is responsible for the action is different from the person who has the target is everywhere. Every business has performance measures on the people in the business. Those performance measures are set by usually more senior people. So they are to encourage the more junior person to do the right thing. The government wants me to install, solar panels on my roof. Now, the government aren't going to climb on my roof and do it. They want me to do that. So how do they encourage me to do that? Here you've got a distinction between the action taker and the target setter. Now, here's a causal loop diagram from the target setter's point of view, the government, the parent. There's an actual, there's a target, there's a gap. Because the target setter is not going to take the action themselves, they need to incentivize the action taker to do it. I need to bribe my son to say, go tidy the room. And I can define the scope and size of the incentive in the hope that the target setter's objectives will be accomplished by the action taker. The kid will tidy the room. Meanwhile, the action taker is in a different world. The action taker wants something and has a gap, and only if that gap is filled will they take the action. So if you bring those two together, as we brought together the asylum seekers and the governments, you get two disconnected loops. Now, the only way they can connect together and work is under a series of conditions. I think there are two. And that's the first one. Over here, the incentive has to be attractive to the action taker. So the incentive has to have some idea of what I want. Because if the incentive isn't attractive to me, I won't bother. Why should I? So thinking about what incentives will actually drive the system from the target setter's point of view is really important. You've then got that. If I can benefit from the incentive by doing something different from what I wanted to do, then I will get the incentive, but I won't close the target setter's gap. Now, that's all about cheating the system. It's all about defrauding the tax authorities by perhaps not paying taxes or by getting some kind of benefit by doing things the wrong way, not the right way. And there are any number of examples in real life where, with good intent, target setters have set objectives, a particular offer on, some merchandise, and people have found their way of printing the coupons and cheating and getting the benefit, but without achieving the objective. And just put that on the table, practitioners, as maybe an interesting starting point for thinking about what happens in all situations where people are setting targets which other people are set to achieve. And of course, I'll just complicate it a bit because it's all about penalties as well, because another way of encouraging people to do the right thing is to say you're penalized if you don't, rather than incentivized if you do. And I've found this structure quite helpful in me thinking about systems around performance measures, targets, all of those things. And of course, that is actually exactly the same as the structure of the diagram I did for the asylum seekers, where the asylum seekers have got, what they want, and the government has got a different objective, and, they work or they don't. So, gosh, I've overrun my time a bit, Megan. I hope that's okay. Once again, very happy for these things to be made available. Megan, I think you're recording, and there'll be a recording available if any of this stuff is of interest. But thanks ever so much, everyone, for listening to all of that. Very happy, Megan, to engage in, general.
We have some questions for you.
Super.
There's
I have
questions in the chat.
So please, Megan, organise that. So I'll stop sharing, or maybe I'll keep the share up just in case I need to refer to it.
Yeah,
Megan,
I think some of them do have to do with the original causal loop diagram.
Yeah.
So Anupam asks, have you explored an enabling no visa requirement or an easy asylum policy?
Right, we're back there. The government, as far as I know, other Brits who have heard all of this, please chip in. The government has been very, very, very boneheaded, my word, that all they talk about is deportation to Rwanda. All they talk about is stopping the boats. All they talk about is breaking their business model. Now, maybe I'm just politically biased. Other Brits that have heard all of this stuff, it makes to me huge sense to think of other ways of doing things. But have you heard anything about this?
Colin raised his hand. Colin, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I just, great diagrams as always, Dennis, both for the generic one and the specific one. I think there's an influence from the experiences of others or predecessors is going to influence the action taker.
Yeah. People will learn from one another as what works and what doesn't work, especially as regards the cheats, I suspect. And then, the action taker will learn as well and try to, mitigate against that. So the diagram evolves. You're dead right. Thank you.
So Carrie brought up an interesting point here. So far, we are discussing symptom fixes. The root cause fix is to tackle the core issue of instability in the other countries of origin. Is that even among the discussion for the politicians in the UK? Well,
Kerry, once again, a totally profound point. This is the root cause. Fix that, and people feel safe where they are. The official answer, I'm sure, Megan, from the politicians is how much aid we give to developing countries so that they fix their problems. My own sense, Kerry, please do chip in, other Brits, that this is just a political answer and it's a sham. And particularly if you think about what is going to happen with the influence of climate change on all areas susceptible to sea level rise. That will drive huge numbers of people away from coastal areas. Where they're going to go. Those are the things to do, but politicians, as far as I understand it, just aren't talking that language. Other Brits, please chip in. Or indeed, other people from around the world that are experiencing maybe similar things or things from a different perspective.
So Jonathan said, what about offering a direct low-cost ticket from Calais to Rwanda?
Well,
and then
yeah.
John Bali says the UK gives asylum to people from Rwanda.
Yeah.
So that also seems kind of
really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that idea of, say, we've got a processing depot in Rwanda and here's your ticket from northern France straight there, is exactly this, another policy to give people access to, a route which is quasi legal, because actually my understanding is asylum seekers are neither illegal nor legal. Asylum seekers are asylum seekers and they have rights of entry on that basis. The question is, when it's scrutinized, are they really asylum seekers or not, however that is done? But something like 2/3 of the people that come across so-called illegally actually end up being admitted into the UK. Big numbers.
So we have two people with raised hands. Cheyenne, do you want to start?
If you may.
Go ahead.
Is my voice clear?
Yep.
Yes.
As someone outside the British Isles and of non-European origins, I have a few things to say. One was the first is these kind of scientific investigation of causal loop diagrams and studying systems and effects, distinguishing symptoms and causes, roots. All of these are not suitable for public masses as a politician. If you're a politician, to my understanding, you have to use rhetoric. You have to use strong words and sentences. You cannot turn the campaign speech into a classroom and project a causal loop diagram on the board and tell people, look, that's what happens. That's because of that archetype. That is because that's a symptom. We should not solve it with a short-term solution. We should focus on the root of the problem. That's not gonna work. That's not gonna work in the political scene. I think maybe it could be done in the near future or far future. I don't know. That was the first thing. The second thing is, as you said, um, asylum seekers are symptom in my mind. You pointed it out very fairly, but I wanted to emphasize because I didn't see any solution to address the root cause of the problem, which is why there are asylum seekers and why people try to move across the planet by force. As we know, asylum seeker is not someone who chooses to travel by free will. He or she is forced to move from his origin to another place. Why are there asylum seekers? We can categorize and classify the reasons into two broad categories. One is anthropological, human interactions, and one is natural or semi-natural causes. Natural causes, famine, I don't know, climate change, rising sea levels, that could not be prevented. But the majority of asylum seekers in today's world, specifically those who are now pursuing their way to the Western Europe or Northern America, they are fleeing from war. They are fleeing from famine. They are fleeing from these are not some abstract ideas that I'm expressing. These are my objective observations because I live in Iran. You may hear it in the news. In this area of the world, lots of things happens. I think that I have a more realistic observation of what's happening. The root cause should be addressed, and what this system, which Mr. Sherwood, if I pronounce it correctly, just showed us, that's very perfect. That's addresses the problem from the UK government point of view and British people point of view, but this does not address why there are asylum seekers. I believe, in short, to conclude, we have to address the root cause, not the symptom, because if we treat the symptom, the root cause will result in the problem to be risen again and again, and every iteration more powerful than before. Thank you.
Cheyenne, as everything you said, I was nodding in agreement. I'm sure everyone else too. Both of your key points, absolutely right. The root cause in that central yellow box, those really must be addressed. And wouldn't it be great to have some causal loop diagrams around that? And your first point, and that, you know, politicians don't behave in this way and they won't give presentations with causal loop diagrams. That's right too. However, most politicians are pretty smart people, and certainly their advisors are. So my plea is that behind the scenes, they've done this and really thought it through. So the policies that they then sell through, you know, the normal channels in their normal political way are well thought through and wise. You don't actually have to have these diagrams, you know, when you're going for election, but you should have wisdom in your head. And I think that the civil servants, the advisors, the politicians themselves ought to be smart enough to think these things through. That's just my hope, I guess. But both of your points, thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for addressing my concerns.
So actually, this is kind of related to that. At the International System Dynamics Conference, one of the workshops that's going to be in the learning and teaching area is how to present your system dynamics work to policymakers. Fernando Redivo is going to be kind of spearheading that presentation, because we want to start to normalize the use of this kind of data and analysis in the policymaking world, so that decisions are more well-informed and people do think through these balancing loops and reinforcing loops, unintended consequences, etc. This is something that we would like to bring more system dynamics and systems thinking into that realm.
Right.
So we have two other people with their hands raised. So Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Hey, Dennis. I want to say two things. One is just speculation that there may be a wonderful business model sitting unattended in Great Britain. These folks who get there are highly motivated. Clearly, somebody in their network had enough money to support them, so they're not your average population of any country. They're quite spectacular people in a way. I think we confuse the people who helped get them there, the criminals, with the actual people who are highly motivated to stay alive. Anyway, you've got them. If you let them in, you've got them in Great Britain, and I would suggest that the Scandinavian countries would be really excited for Great Britain to be a training center for their declining population needs for skilled workers. So instead of viewing as a big problem, I could see viewing it as a huge asset. You've got universities that need students, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I wouldn't probably put them in universities. So there's that, which is just goofy. Sorry for bringing it up. But the other thing, as I was listening to you, Dennis, and I love listening to you, I was reminded about Carrie's constant, reminder to me that many models have hidden variables, and that finding the hidden variables is sometimes the big deal. So in the last 6 months, I've started putting motivation into my system dynamics models, and I actually make it a pink ellipse so it stands out. because I find when you at least speculate on the motivations, you don't have to connect them to anything. If everyone says, I'm not motivated by that, that's fine. But you can say, if there were people motivated by this, what would it do in the system? Because politicians and others are often not very interested in talking about some of their motivations. I just put them on the damn diagram anyway and find the missing conversation. So those are my thoughts. It's been really fun, as always, Dennis, listening to you.
Thanks. Yeah, motivation. What are the drivers? And this one up here is obviously a driver, you know, the hope. But all this stuff about the politics in the UK and the idea that actually, you know, immigration is a good thing rather than a bad thing, that's very much associated with people's beliefs, people's motivations. And you're dead right, Mark. That's really, really powerful. Thank you.
Carrie, you have your hand up too. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, all I wanted to say really was I think John Foley mentioned it in the chat as I was waiting, and that is that there are other forms of immigration. My mom, for example, all of her carers are from African countries that have instability. You know, and one of the reasons that they're in the UK is because of the huge gap in wages. You know, there might be very small wages, very small salaries over here for carers, but that money goes an awful long way when they send it back to Nigeria, for example, where a lot of them seem to be coming from. And that kind of links into Mark's point as well, you know, that how can, you know, these people are useful, you know, if there are job openings that need to be filled that make sense because their buying power is so much greater, you know, we might be seeing a lot more of that, not just because of climate change reasons or instability of war, but just simply because it makes economic sense. So I think there was that. And then the other point I wanted to make, I did put in the chat, and that was, you know, this has been fantastic. You know, thank you, Dennis. And thank you for opening this up. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if the System Dynamics Society hosted a regular call where we did some exploration like this of a topic that's meaningful for the world, and then maybe look to actually share that with a government or some decision maker where we might be able to help make a difference. Just an idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so there's a bunch of other interesting comments in the chat. We don't have time to get to them all, but I do want to thank Dennis and all of you for participating today, and Dennis for your presentation of this. I also want to open up the floor for future people in this group or people outside of this group who would like to do a presentation at a practitioner networking session. So at the second half of the year, we'd like to continue this after the conference. So if anyone is interested in doing a practitioner networking session, something similar to what Dennis did, maybe exploring a topic, doing either showing a causal loop diagram, or we could kind of do a little group model building exercise or mapping exercise during the session, and discuss kind of the factors and how they're related to a certain topic. You can reach out to either Sarah Chung, she's the VP of Professional Practice at the System Dynamics Society, and also she works at Skip Design ED, or you can reach out to me at the System Dynamics Society if you're interested in running one of these practitioner networking sessions presenting in the future. So that would be great. Any other closing observation from you, Dennis?
Well, you know, just to thank everyone. Really lively conversation, and you know, the really powerful points. But you know, that last one from Kerry, you know, how can we really make a difference? Because you know, this is just one example of many that we all know. That would be nice if we could make a difference. So thank you, everyone. I've just left my email address in the chat bit. Please contact me if anyone wants to chat some more, or indeed if the main slides you would like, that's fine. And thank you, Megan, and everyone at ST Society. Have a great conference in Bergen. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I'm sure it'll go really well. Thank you.
We'll be sharing the recording and the slides as well with the attendees. So look out for an email from us about that. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Oh, bye.
Bye.